He could command $100 million fortunes with a single nod, but he couldn't convince his own son to take a single bite. Donovan Steele sat, a man carved from ice and ambition, in his tailored suit. He watched his 8-year-old son, Leo, rock back and forth in the plush booth of Aria, the city's most exclusive restaurant. The boy's untouched plate of seared scallops, a dish worth more than most people's weekly groceries, grew cold. From across the room, the hushed judgment of other diners felt like 1,000 tiny needles against Donovan's skin. Donovan's jaw clenched with every muffled comment, every sidelong glance. "Leo, please," he whispered, the word a shard of glass. "Everyone is watching." But then, something shifted in the atmosphere. A waitress approached their table, her movements so fluid and gentle they seemed to calm the very air around her. Without a word, she knelt beside Leo's chair and began to hum a soft, intricate melody. What Donovan couldn't possibly know was that she was not just a server. She was about to teach him a lesson no fortune could ever buy. Within minutes, the boy who had been lost in a silent world for 2 years was eating a piece of scallop from her outstretched hand. Donovan could only stare, the foundations of his world trembling. Who was this woman? And how had she just accomplished what a team of the world's most expensive specialists had deemed impossible? 3 days earlier, the private elevator ascended 60 floors in a silent, chrome-plated hush. Donovan Steele, the formidable CEO of Steel Dynamics, stood in his corner office, a glass-walled kingdom overlooking a city that sprawled below him like a chessboard he had already won. His empire was built on 3 pillars: healthcare, technology, and education, sectors that shaped the lives of millions. Yet the one life he cherished most, his son's, remained a locked room to which he had no key. His assistant's knock was barely a whisper. "Mr. Steele, the car is ready for your dinner with Leo." Donovan closed his eyes. Another mandatory father-son meal. Another evening spent staring across a chasm of silence at a child who lived in a universe he could not enter. Across the city, in the cramped staff room of Aria, Elara Vance tied her apron. At 32, she moved with the quiet grace of someone who had learned to carry invisible burdens. Her hands were marked by the toil of double shifts, but her eyes held a profound empathy that no amount of wealth could purchase, an understanding born from years of loving those the world had overlooked. She glanced at her reflection in a cracked mirror. A decade ago, these same hands had guided children through monumental breakthroughs. A decade ago, she believed she could change the world. Now, she carried plates and swallowed her pride, one table at a time. Meanwhile, 8-year-old Leo Steele sat in the back of a silent black sedan, his small fingers tracing invisible constellations on the cool glass of the window. The city lights streaked past, a galaxy of stars he could never hope to touch. He lived in a sprawling mansion with 17 rooms, but confined himself to one, his bedroom, where the world was a manageable whisper and the sounds didn't feel like shards of glass. The evening began, as it always did. Donovan and Leo were seated in their secluded corner booth. The boy instantly clamped his hands over his ears, a shield against the restaurant's soft, classical piano. Donovan ordered for them both, his tone clipped and accustomed to immediate obedience. "The usual for the child," he told Elara, his gaze locked on his phone. "And it must not be too warm. He's particular." Elara simply nodded, but her gaze, honed by years of observation, was fixed on Leo. She saw it all, the sensory overload, the retreat into his own world, the way his small body curled into a question mark, desperately seeking an answer. When the food arrived, the familiar, painful ritual began. Donovan cajoled, then bargained, then threatened in a low, frustrated tone. Leo just rocked and hummed, adrift on his own private sea. The whispers from other tables grew louder. Then Elara did something that changed the course of everything. She knelt beside Leo's chair, not towering over him as every other adult in his life did, but meeting him at his own level. She began to hum a melody, so soft and haunting it felt like a forgotten lullaby. It was a simple tune, but she wove it into a minor key that perfectly matched the rhythm of Leo's rocking. The boy's hands slowly fell from his ears. His eyes, which usually darted everywhere but at faces, found hers. Without breaking the melody, Elara picked up a small, crescent-shaped piece of scallop. She moved it in a gentle, circling arc, the very same pattern Leo had been tracing on the table. She made the food dance for him, a silent ballet composed for an audience of one. Leo leaned forward, and then, the miracle. He opened his mouth. Donovan watched, breathless, as his son ate bite after bite, his small body uncoiling from its knot of tension for the first time in what felt like an eternity. He did not say thank you, but the look on his face was the dawn of a new language. 10 years earlier, Elara stood before a classroom of 15 children, her heart a vessel of endless possibility. The Haven Institute was her creation, a sanctuary where different minds were not seen as problems to be solved, but as unique gifts to be unwrapped. Remember, she would tell her aides, they are not broken, they simply speak a different language. Our job is to become fluent. 5 years earlier, Donovan sat in a sterile boardroom, reviewing quarterly reports with the precision of a surgeon. The education division was underperforming. "Cut the special needs initiatives," he commanded, his voice devoid of emotion. "They are not cost-effective. Reallocate the resources to mainstream programs." He signed the document with the same hand that would one day prove incapable of feeding his own child. The devastating irony was, at the time, completely lost on him. 2 years earlier, the diagnosis. Donovan sat across from a doctor in a room that felt cold and airless. The words autism spectrum disorder echoed around him. "He will require specialized care," the doctor explained. "There are some wonderful programs, though unfortunately many have had their funding cut recently." Donovan heard nothing else. His entire empire felt as if it were turning to dust in the face of his son's profound silence. In the weeks that followed, Donovan found himself requesting Elara's section every time he and Leo dined at Aria. The boy, who could barely sit still for 5 minutes at home, would spend hours in a state of calm, eating peacefully under her gentle, intuitive guidance. She taught Donovan the small things that mattered: how to dim the blinding light of his phone screen, how to lower the register of his voice, how to approach Leo from the side so as not to startle him. Each lesson was like learning a new, sacred language. "You have a gift with him," Donovan admitted one evening, his usual armor of arrogance replaced by a raw vulnerability. "Where did you learn all this?" "Practice," Elara replied, her voice soft as she refilled his water glass, but hinting at a story much deeper than she let on. Donovan started arriving earlier and staying later, but complications arose. The restaurant's management grew concerned. Why was their most sought-after waitress devoting so much time to one troublesome table? Gossip columnists caught wind of the story, and the headlines were merciless. "Billionaire CEO's waitress whisperer, and when money can't buy fatherhood." But the true storm was gathering from an ocean away. Isabel Croft, Donovan's ex-wife and Leo's mother, read the tabloids from her sun-drenched villa in Monaco. She had left them 2 years ago, right after Leo's diagnosis had shattered their picture-perfect life. Now, she sensed an opportunity. "An inappropriate relationship with the service staff," she purred to her lawyer over a glass of champagne. "Clearly, it's an unfit environment for my son. I want full custody." The evening that changed everything began like any other. Elara approached their table with her usual calming smile, but Donovan saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the faint shadows beneath them. As she helped Leo with his meal, the boy did something that no one could have predicted. He reached out his small hand and gently touched hers. Then, in a voice that was barely more than a breath, he spoke his first words in 2 years. "Ile mama, hungry?" The words hung in the air, a prayer that had just been answered. Tears welled in Elara's eyes, tears she couldn't hide. Donovan felt a profound crack in the wall he had built around his heart. "She's not the one who's hungry," Donovan said, his voice thick with a sudden gut-wrenching realization. "She's been taking care of everyone but herself." In that moment, they saw each other for the first time, not as a billionaire and a waitress, but as two human beings bound by their love for one extraordinary child. "Tell me about you," Donovan said. It wasn't a command, it was a plea. The custody papers arrived on a Tuesday, accompanied by paparazzi photos of Donovan, Leo, and Elara sharing what looked like an intimate family meal. Isabel's lawyers painted a damning portrait of instability and a father so incompetent he had outsourced his parental duties to a restaurant employee. The hearing was set for the following week. Donovan's legal team was confident yet cautious. "They will make this about class and race," his lead attorney warned. "They will say you are exploiting this woman. You need to distance yourself from her." But Donovan couldn't, not from the woman who had given him back his son. The media frenzy was brutal. Reporters swarmed Aria, turning Elara's workplace into a circus. The restaurant, buckling under the pressure, forced her to take an unpaid leave of absence. For the first time in his life, Donovan couldn't sleep. Leo, sensing the storm of adult distress, retreated further into his silent world. Without Elara, he stopped eating again. The morning of the hearing, Donovan made a decision. He called Elara. "I need you to testify," he said, his voice heavy. "I need you to tell them who you really are." The courtroom was a spectacle. Isabel sat in the front row, a vision of cold perfection. Her lawyer was ruthless, painting Elara as a manipulative gold digger. Then it was Elara's turn. She walked to the witness stand with a quiet dignity that silenced the room. "Tell us about your relationship with Mr. Steele and his son," the lawyer sneered. Elara looked at Donovan, then at Leo, then at the sea of judging faces. "My name is Elara Vance," she began, her voice gaining strength with every word. "I hold a master's degree in special education from a top university. For 8 years, I was the director of the Haven Institute, where I worked with over 200 children with developmental and communication disorders. I taught them to trust, to communicate, to believe in their own worth." The courtroom fell silent. "I lost my position," she continued, "when our program's primary funding was cut. The corporation that defunded us was Steele Dynamics. Mr. Steele's company eliminated the very services his own son would desperately need. Services I have dedicated my life to providing." Donovan felt the blood drain from his face. "So, yes," Elara's voice now rang with a powerful clarity. "I know how to help Leo eat. I know how to make him feel safe, because I have spent my life learning that children like him are not broken. They are just ignored. And when the world decided it would no longer pay me to love them, I kept on loving them anyway. One table, one shift, one moment at a time." She turned her gaze directly to Isabel. "You want to know why Leo calls me Ili Mama? Because I'm the first person who saw him as a gift, not a burden. Not because I was paid to, but because that is what real love looks like." The courtroom erupted. In the chaos, Donovan heard only one thing, the sound of his own heart breaking wide open. The judge's ruling was swift. Leo would remain with his father under the condition that he receive professional support and therapy, with a care plan to be developed by qualified experts. Outside, Donovan found Elara sitting alone on the courthouse steps. "I'm sorry," he said, the words feeling utterly inadequate. "I am so sorry for what my company did, for what I took from you, and from all of those children. It took me losing my own son to finally understand what I had destroyed." Elara looked up at him, the man who had unknowingly shattered her world. Your apology doesn't bring back those years, she said quietly, but it's a beginning. Donovan sat beside her on the cold stone. I want to offer you a position, he said, not as a waitress. I want you to be the director of the new Steele Foundation for Neurodevelopmental Support. Your vision, unlimited budget, full control. Elara searched his eyes for any sign of pity or manipulation. She found only sincerity. Why? She asked. Because my son isn't the only child like him, Donovan replied, and because the world needs what you have to give. That evening, in the quiet of Donovan's penthouse apartment, something beautiful unfolded. Elara prepared Leo's dinner, and this time Donovan watched, not as a helpless bystander, but as an eager student. He practiced her soft humming, her patient, gentle approach. He was finally learning to see his son not as a problem to be fixed, but as a perfect soul who spoke his own unique language. Leo ate from both of their hands, his small body relaxed and trusting. Tears streamed down Donovan's cheeks, the first he had shed in years. You brought me back to my own heart, he whispered to Elara. No, she replied, her hand finding his across the table. You just finally learned how to listen to it. 6 months later, the Steele Foundation opened its doors in the very same building that had once housed the Haven Institute. Elara stood in the main classroom, the sound of children's laughter filling the air like music. Donovan arrived with Leo, but his son no longer clung to him. This was his sanctuary now, a place where his differences were celebrated. On a wall in the entryway hung a small plaque, in honor of all the children we forgot to see, and for those who saw them anyway. The real transformation, however, was in the small, quiet moments. It was in Donovan humming softly when he noticed Leo was feeling overwhelmed. It was in Leo reaching for his father's hand without being prompted. It was in a family finally learning to speak the universal language of love. As the afternoon sun streamed through the windows, Leo looked up from his drawing. A picture of 3 figures holding hands beneath a sky full of swirling, colorful stars. Mama Eli, he said, his voice clear and strong now. Daddy, Leo, family. Donovan knelt beside his son, his heart so full he felt it might burst. Yes, he whispered, family. Across the room, Elara smiled. She had learned a profound truth on her journey. Sometimes the greatest changes in the world do not begin with grand gestures or vast sums of money. They begin with the simple, revolutionary act of truly seeing another person. She wasn't hired to change a life. She had simply refused to look away. And in that refusal, she had done more than save one billionaire's son. She had held up a mirror to a man's soul and showed him everything he had been missing. If this story of compassion and connection touched your heart, please show your support by leaving a like. For more powerful stories that remind us of what truly matters, be sure to subscribe to the channel Stories for You.